Well, Greg, hello again. It's been a fascinating few days. I know we get bored of saying that at the moment, but the reality is, with the Iran war and everything going on, the whole control of the air, which has been a fundamental part of Air Force, I think this whole war in Iran has just thrown a completely fresh, maybe not new, but fresh light on the importance of control of the air. What's your take on it?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's sometimes difficult to articulate what you mean by control of the air, but I think we've seen that now writ large in Iran, whether it be in the Gulf region, around Akrotiri, over Iran itself, and also the poor travails of the Type 45 and why so critical some of these assets are, and how you have to build that layered network.
Yeah, no, and I think particularly for me, it's been a bit of a wake-up call. You and I did our formative years in the sort of post-Cold War era where we were largely operating in a permissive environment. In other words, it wasn't really dangerous. Afghanistan, frankly, they weren't going to shoot you out of the sky. We could effectively do what we wanted. What we're seeing now is what happens when a major superpower decides to have a go at you. And if you aren't properly prepared, you're incredibly vulnerable, aren't you? I mean, I think things like Iran watching, US fighter jets operating over Tehran with impunity, and the advances of long-range missile strikes, the importance of missile defense, the importance of fighter jets in attack, and also the importance of space. I mean, it is as a operating domain. I'm not trying to underplay the Army and the Navy here. Clearly, they have a vital role to play, but the Army hasn't been involved in this one, and the Navy, frankly, as you say, has been operating a bit in the sidelines. It really has been the battle of air power.
Yeah, and the strategic impact of airstrikes, be they by drones or ballistic missiles or even aircraft, have a broad effect, and completely change the whole politics of the scenario. And we saw that on attacks in some of the Gulf states. And one attack on Akrotiri almost put the country in complete lockdown. But I think sense prevailed in the end.
Yeah, but I think so. One of the reasons we're doing this podcast is that the air power is often not well understood. People see a fighter jet, they see the Battle of Britain, they think that's air power and control of the air, which is such a vital part. So the RAF conducts an annual air and space combat power event each year. This year it was at RAF Brize Norton, largely to try to make sure that the senior stakeholders, particularly our political masters, better understand what components, what makes it up. It isn't just a single fighter. It isn't just a Spitfire, dazzling in the Battle of Britain. There is a lot to air power and control of the air. And we were very fortunate this year that we were invited along, able to do a few interviews along the way. I think my basic takeaway for it, before we get into the detail, was just how professional everybody was and how overheated the whole situation is. What was your sort of takeaway from it?
Yeah, hugely privileged to be invited to that. I mean, obviously, I remember it when I used to sort of be part of the organisation of it when I was serving. But yeah, to go and see it now, 10 years after I've left, and listen to the men and women of today talk to the things that they are doing is quite humbling, actually, and quite inspiring. I think you and I both enjoyed chatting to the individuals. We'll see some of the clips in a minute. I think I said to you at the time, I didn't really appreciate who was whose rank until after I looked after the event, that they were so lucid in what they were talking about and so clearly passionate about their subject. So yeah, it's a great opportunity to try and get to understand air power. Otherwise, you view it through the lens, as you say, of the Battle of Britain or air shows, and that just doesn't possibly convey the complexity of today.
So I think our efforts now, we're going to try and do three podcasts covering the sort of broad themes. And I think the simple version of what the first podcast is about offense and defense, control of the air. You've got to control your bit of the air and protect your own people, but you've also got to, and in the same way, threaten your enemy's control of the air. Otherwise, he will take advantage. And I think, if we can start this off, I think I was fascinating. We were very privileged, weren't we, to have the Assistant Chief of the Air Staff, Cap Townsend, Air Vice Marshal Cap Townsend, which we both know very well. I served with him in the Harrier Force. You served with him before. This was his take on what control of the air is all about.
explain control of the air. So Spitfires, Hurricanes, black and white, Second World War. That's not a bad starting point. People can generally understand that. But my fear with that is we can't think about control of the air in black and white. We've got to be thinking about control of the air in wonderful technicolor of the future. We've got to make sure we are conscious of the adversary. So the nature of military business is the adversary does X, we do Y, and there's always a relationship between those two things. And of course, we wish to outthink the adversary. And I think we are in that space with the uncrewed capabilities that we're developing, the way in which they'll work with the high-end capabilities, that high-low relationship, capabilities like E7 coming into service. You know, we have the brains. You know, we have the ability to go and see things that our adversaries hopefully will not see. We have the ability to use space in a way that we think our adversaries won't be able to. But the way we bring it together, the way we think about that, the way in which we prioritize control of the air in our thinking is the important thing. And I would say it's not just the Royal Air Force's responsibility. Integrated air and missile defense, control of the air is a team sport. Of course, we fly the fast pointy aeroplanes that tend to get the limelight. But air command and control is not just a Royal Air Force thing. We have embarked capabilities that, and Royal Navy capabilities can help us there. You know, space is a truly joint endeavor. And we have to be thinking about how we do that in an integrated sense, the integrated force with NATO. And I think that's another area where we have made an absolute tangible shift in our thinking that whatever we're doing has to be viewed through a NATO lens. Now, we come from an Air Force where that's always been the case, but today it's been really re-emphasized. I know the Middle East is really important today, but we are drawing those lessons back into the NATO, the Euro-Atlantic conversation, because from a homeland defense perspective, of course, we have to think about that. That can never be a lower priority. And contextualizing homeland defense within the NATO arena, I think, is absolutely where we should be.
So fascinating to listen to Cab Townsend. You know, you and I both know he's a former fighter pilot. You and I are both former fighter pilots. I think one thing, if we start to distill out what this control of the air is, you clearly need fighter jets as a key part of that. How come they have, you know, remained such an important part of control of the air?
Yeah, I think it's so easy to get caught up in the current narrative of drones and some of those cheaper methods of doing this. But what people don't appreciate, I think, is the scale and the scope of what air control requires. It requires the ability to respond quickly and over huge distances. I mean, we're talking hundreds and hundreds of miles here at speed. And in a typhoon, that is literally 1 or 2 times the speed of sound. It's the fighter jet, the combat aircraft, that gives you that response time, that ability to reach out and start taking out things at a great range away from yourself. Yes, you need other things in the layer that then, because as you slowly get closer and closer to home, but it's the ability to reach out and touch things at the fast pace and at the range that a combat aircraft can bring.
It's an incredibly expensive part of the equation, isn't it? The fighter jets themselves are normally 100 million a piece, and the pilots, although, you know, it is not an easy job, let's put it that way, to do it. We have a lot of people apply to join, very few people make it through. And I think what's fascinating, let's hear it from one of the pilots we were lucky enough to interview on the day, Buzz, who gives an impression of exactly what it's all about to fly a modern fighter jet and actually what else it entails.
So Typhoon is the bulk of the combat air mass for the most part. So in terms of control of the air, we do a little bit of everything, whether that's quick reaction alert, protecting UK sovereign territory, both here in the UK and in the Falkland Islands, conducting air and missile defense, both again here in the UK or elsewhere, especially as you're seeing at the moment in the Eastern Mediterranean or in the Middle East. But then equally about conducting offensive operations in other regions of the world.
Yeah, it's quite busy at the moment. You guys are
very busy,
pretty much deployed.
Yeah.
But it's also quite a big team effort. We tend to focus, you know, you and I was a pilot myself,
yeah,
but it's all about the pilots. Yeah. Well, it isn't actually, to get you in the air, but also once you're airborne, it's a massive team effort. Can you talk to that at all?
Yeah, obviously the pilots like to pretend we are the entire entity, but no, as you said, we are just the tip of the sword, but there is also a very large sword behind that, which is all of the engineering personnel, the ops personnel, the intelligence personnel, the command and control that help us operate when we're there. You know, a single fighter on its own up there isn't much use. It needs to be part of a wider group of people. And then we need to be provided with the information that's actually going to let us go to where we need to go, find what we need to find, and then prosecute that however we need to.
So let's say a typical QRA mission. Have you done any that have got a bit exciting? I don't want to know the details.
Yeah.
But in fact, you're going to rush airborne in the middle of the night. A lot of ground crew. Just talk us through how you then find out what your target is, how you refuel, all of that sort of stuff.
Yeah, so I've done a fair amount of QRA. I can certainly think of one occasion out of RAF Lossiemouth, actually, which was a 4 a.m. scramble out of bed.
Ouch.
Yep, that one caught me cold.
But you sleep in all the kit, don't you? So...
Yeah. So thankfully I was asleep in most of my kit. But as long as I can get up and get airborne in time, then that's fine. I'm quite happy to lose a couple of seconds if it means I'm using those seconds to wake up while I put my boots on.
Because most of this stuff is not very comfortable.
It's not super comfortable, no. But that occasion, yes, that was get airborne out of Lossiemouth as soon as possible with very little information at that point in the dark. Start heading north, where we were then told we were going to be intercepting Russian bears, which is relatively common Russian activity, testing UK defences. And from that point, our job is just to get alongside them, interrogate them, find out what they're doing, find out where they're going, and then if they continue to trespass into UK airspace, if they do come into UK airspace at all, just to escort them throughout, and then keep the air traffic control agencies, the C2 agencies, aware of exactly where we are and where these aircraft are going.
And do the tankers chase up after you as well?
Yeah, exactly that, because these bears obviously carry a lot more fuel than I carry. So the Voyager then gets airborne, if it isn't already, out of Brize Norton or wherever it's been sent. And those are the people that then keep giving us the fuel to mean that we can remain on station for the entire time and accomplish the whole task rather than having to go home.
And you've obviously got a very good radar and lots of capabilities on board the aircraft, but that's not the only intelligence you get when you're flying around, is it? So what other, because there's obviously a lot of other assets, both ground-based, maybe even air-based, that are giving you situational awareness.
Yeah, of course. In Typhoon, I have my own radar, but that radar has its limits, both in terms of range and what it can detect. So we do rely a lot upon ground-based radar systems, command and control, notably out of RAF Bulmer and the antennas that it has access to. But then equally, we rely upon friends in the Navy who've also got assets that can detect airborne threats and targets. And then even just UK air traffic control agencies, because they've obviously got their own radars and they feed into all of the picture that I then get in my cockpit to help me find the thing I'm going to find.
I guess the final question about weapons, because you're a qualified weapons instructor, aren't you? You're sort of pinnacle of the sort of instructor cadre on the... We're hearing a lot at the moment from Iran about the drones, the Shaheeds, but of course they're really slow speed. People sort of assume you just fire lots of missiles at them. They're quite expensive missiles. I don't suppose they stand out very well on radar either. Is it time for getting back to guns and guns kills type stuff?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, certainly the cost analysis of this new fight that we're having to get involved in is definitely one that we're putting a lot of thought to, and trying to find if there's other ways to not shoot hundreds of thousands of pounds worth of missile at something that costs a few $1,000s. And that's certainly something we're working towards. But yeah, as you say, these things are small, they are slow, they go low to the ground, but they just fall into what Typhoon has called for quite a long time a difficult air target set. So things that don't necessarily move too fast, which makes radar hard to find them. So it's something we've trained for years. It just means that now we're putting that training into action regularly. And if anything, that just means we're getting better at it. As the boys are showing out there right now, it is a difficult air target, but it is still well within Typhoon's target set.
The tip of the sword is one thing, it's flying around, but ultimately, sometimes you have to deliver weapons. In my day, it was a lot of dumb weapons, £1,000 that haven't really changed in the Second World War. You're flying around with a lot more high-tech weapons. We've got a couple here. Let's look at the Paveway.
Sure.
So let's talk us through what the Paveway does.
So the Paveway 4, as a weapon in itself, is not entirely different to the dumb weapons that you're talking about. It's just had significant modifications to make it far smarter and far more accurate. So yeah, this is a Paveway 4. This is carried by Typhoon and by F-35. This is a precision guided munition. So it can be guided either by GPS, if we give it GPS coordinates, with accuracies down to the meters, or it can be laser guided as well. So any aircraft with a laser designation pod that can see something on the ground, they can illuminate it with a laser and the weapon will guide itself to it.
And in terms of, it's because you can tailor the size of the weapons, so you can have £1,000, you can have bigger or smaller. But they also have different fusing options, don't they? Because people naturally assume when a bomb hits a target, it blows up. You can actually go into a target a certain distance, can't you? Talk to me about the fusing.
Yeah, entirely. So Paveway 4 actually has cockpit selectable fusing. So it's all about weapon to target matching, finding the right weapon to achieve the effects. If I'm going after a building, my objective might not be to destroy the entire building. More often than not, it probably isn't, because often our goal is to cause as little collateral damage as possible, and just achieve the effect that we need. So it might be that my target is actually personnel on the bottom floor of the building, so I can fuse that weapon in cockpit to make sure that it will go through the top 3, 4, 5 stories of the building, detonate in the bottom floor, leave for the most part the building completely intact, and just have the effect that I want.
Yeah, because people forget that Second World War, the reason we had 1,000 bomber raids and 20 bombs on each aircraft, we were missing by 4 miles.
Yeah.
Now, you guys, what's about 4 meters, I guess, maybe less?
Meters few.
Yeah, and therefore you can now be much more surgical. You don't need necessarily a big bang.
Nope.
You have much smaller bang to have the desired effect. And that's what the weapons instructors on the squadrons do, isn't it?
Indeed, that's a big part of our job, is helping people to understand the weapon they need to use to achieve the effect. Pavoy 4 is a £500 weapon. When you compare it to the £1,000 class, £2,000 class that people carry, pretty much every job that we need to achieve, we can achieve with a £500 weapon, as long as you put it in exactly the right place.
So
which is what this
less
does.
collateral damage and fewer casualties.
Exactly.
And it's really, really important. So the other missile we got here is Brimstone. Just quickly, what does Brimstone do?
Yeah, so Brimstone, this is an original Brimstone, but Brimstone 2 is what we carry on the Typhoon. It is a laser-guided, rail-fired missile, which was originally designed to deal with tanks. So it's got a shape charge at the front designed to deal with reactive armor and then homogeneous armor, but it's got a really capable moving target tracking capability, which has meant that it's been extremely useful for us against anything that moves effectively. So trucks, motorbikes, but again, it has a very low collateral. So it might be that our objective is to stop a vehicle, not necessarily kill the people inside it. If you put a Brimstone 2 through the front of that vehicle will stop, and I can almost guarantee you most people will get out of it. It's a bit shaken up, probably, I would have thought, but they'll probably be all right. So again, a low collateral weapon that is laser designated and very precise.
Well, that was interesting, wasn't it, Sean? Listening to Buzz's stories there, and it's always impressive actually to listen to the calm authority that they talk to. It's perhaps that you should take away more than anything. Well, let's turn back again to ACAS, to Cab Townsend, because I certainly asked him how they were coping with learning the lessons, literally, day by day, as they're witnessing them in Ukraine and Iran, and how they then build on that, on the capabilities that we already possess, recognizing, of course, that we've got a defence investment plan just around the corner. So let's hear how he approaches the fighting today, but also looking forward to tomorrow.
I think the first thing I would say is everything we're seeing in the Middle East at the moment re-emphasizes the importance of control of the air. There is absolutely nothing more important than what we do than control of the air. I would also say control of space is within that as well. If I stick on the air breathing stuff, though, just the breadth of the challenge that we face. And I was talking to colleagues earlier to say, the Royal Air Force has to be able to counter the highest threat that's out there, wherever that comes from. Let's hypothesize that's a NATO Russian type threat. With an adversary there that is thinking on a daily basis as much as anybody else. But we also have to counter the low-grade threat, the cheap, the cheerful, the uncrewed one-way effectors that we're seeing at the moment. So that's a tall order. Yeah. And I think we are meeting that challenge. Again, we come back to a resilience. Are there enough of us to be able to go and do what we need to go and do? We had a conversation this morning about integrated air and missile defense. I think the reality is there's a symbiosis between control of the air and integrated air and missile defense. And we have to come together as not just a UK community, but an international community. Yeah. And I would also then, using some of the things that we're seeing in the Middle East, the complexity and the scale. So if I think about our backgrounds, if you went to Red Flag 20 years ago, you'd control 80 aeroplanes as a mission leader, incredibly rewarding activity. If I think back to the Second World War, we'd have 1,000 bomber raids. Bring all that together. Next year, we might have an operational mission that has 10,000 entities. Yeah. Red and blue. How do we command and control that? And again, I was speaking to colleagues earlier, think about the Dowding system. You might readily go to, well, radar won the day. The C2 system won the day, but that was put together by human beings. So I'm really keen about re-emphasizing how we think about air power, how we think about control of the air, how we think about control of space. Yeah. Because if we think about it the way we thought about it 10 weeks ago, 10 years ago, we'll fail. We've got to be thinking about 10 weeks forwards, 10 years forwards. And I know it's going to look different. And it's quite easy to wave a hand and go, well, artificial intelligence can source all sorts of things. But I think there's a real role here where we can use technologies like AI, which we didn't have in the same way even 2 years ago, to help us conceive what a mission looks like with 10,000 entities, 20,000 entities, because with small, uncrewed platforms, we've got to bring that high-low mix together.
Yeah.
And I think we need capabilities like AI to help us conceive those opportunities. And I think there are opportunities. And we also need to think about countering the adversary because they'll be thinking the same way.
So that was fascinating. Cab's clearly a very impressive guy. But what's also interesting about these lessons learned is you and I have spent a bit of time in the media, and we regularly get pestered about the role of unmanned systems. People saying, oh, it's Ukraine, the days of manned are over. It's all about drones operating on the front line, with 80% of casualties now with drones. It's drone warfare. Well, I do think what's interesting, and there's a bit more to these unmanned systems than simply the front line in Ukraine, isn't there?
Yeah, and if you're really interested, you need to go and read the RAF strategy about autonomous combat platforms, where they talk about tiers of drones, moving all the way up to the most advanced sort of loyal wingman, which is one of the concepts people are perhaps familiar with. It isn't just about that one-way attack drone or the relatively simple mission of surveillance around the battlefield and dropping ammunition on a tank. We've got some quite sophisticated capabilities now beginning to arrive, which need to work in tandem with the manned or crewed aircraft in order to allow them to penetrate, obviously quite sophisticated defences. And we were very, very lucky to see some of that at Brize Norton.
No, I completely agree. And I think, to give an example, we had a squadron leader, Stu Quinn, who was very happy to chat to us about what looked like it was just a piston engine drone, but had a really sexy bit of capability on it that actually helps the fighter jets break through enemy territory. Let's listen to what Stu had to say.
This is the RAF's latest capability. It's called Stormstride. It is an unmanned aerial vehicle, and it is designed as an electronic warfare platform. The great thing about this, it is a two-stroke petrol engine, pretty much. It only goes about 50 knots. But I find it really fascinating because inside it, we have a electronic warfare capability, which is the cutting-edge technology, combined with this older technology, which is the two-stroke petrol engine, as you rightly identified. So it's a great mix of old and new. So this is actually part of the Air Force's autonomous collective platform system. So it can fly autonomous, and that's what it's designed to do, or we can directly control it as well. So depending on what the mission set is and what we're trying to do, it will do both.
So we're seeing the basic platform. You said it was a platform that carries the clever stuff. What's the clever stuff? What's that called in the back there?
So Brightstorm, which is provided by Leonardo, is a deception jamming capability. It's very similar to a system that's actually on the Typhoon jet. So it comes from the same family. So delivering the same sort of deception jamming as you would find with the Typhoon.
Yeah, because that sort of capability is vital, isn't it? Control of the air. Enemy's radars are looking at you. Yeah. If you can do anything to disrupt their picture, that's what this seems to be able to do.
4 of these in the air, putting out deception jamming will really confuse any air defense system, and they won't really know what's going on, and perfect, because it will defend our manned aircraft. So,
and the other thing, of course, from the days of the Cold War, I'm old enough and grey enough that we had to keep this stuff updated, because as soon as you had a capability, the enemy will work something against it. How quickly can this be upgraded?
Literally pop it out, reload the new stuff into it, pop it back in again, good to go. And as technology advances, we'll just change the box and put a different box in. So it's more about the payload than the platform. Got a very low radar cross section, which is fantastic. And when it recovers, it's actually got a little parachute that sits in here, pops out, and then the wings will pop out, and then we can pop the wings back on again. So it's really clever, simple, and complicated at the same time. It's really hard to describe.
I love the idea of a simple platform, clever technology inside it. Yeah. And that whole area makes control of the air. It's a vital contribution, and yet it's a relatively small bit of platform, isn't it?
It's cutting edge tech with some old and new stuff added in, and it's a real change for us. It's a real battlefield enabler for us, especially with new capabilities in the market. So this is great. We're really lucky to have it. So hopefully we'll get more in the future.
So that's fascinating. But control of the air is also about protecting the United Kingdom. And if we've got to protect it, we've got to know that people are going to be attacking us. And therefore protecting the air bases. And actually, over the last year, we have had one of our air bases attacked for the first time in ages. Let's hear what Captain Townsend had to say about protecting the UK.
So we now live in an environment where an RAF base has been attacked, and it's been many, many years since we've been able to reflect on that. And thankfully, no one was injured. So what does that mean? It means that we need to protect the UK. We need to bring that back into our thinking in a more fulsome way. That's not to say that we're not protecting the UK every day. We are with UK Quick Reaction Alert 24/7, and they do a fantastic job because we still get visited by certain friends, and we need to make sure we can react to that. But as the threat is changing in the Middle East, as we see the threat evolving in Ukraine, we've got to make sure we're bringing how that affects the UK homeland. Now, one thing I would say is that we're also thinking about UK homeland, somewhere we're going to fight from. So whilst our careers have been largely expeditionary in nature, if I remember correctly, you flew missions from 9 Squadron from Bruggen and back. Yep. So, we haven't always deployed. We have done it from a home plate. And that's more in the transition to conflict thinking, right, how do we make the UK more resilient as somewhere we can fly and fight from? Some of the missions we've done that you would have seen in the news into Poland with some of the incursions from Russia, that is us proving to ourselves again that we can fight from the homeland and have reach and then come back. So our air stations need to be resilient. We need to be thinking about that counter-UAS threat into the homeland. And it plays back to the integrated air and missile defence conversation as well. Do I think that the UK is going to have a bountiful number of Patriot missile systems up and down the country? I don't. But then integrated air and missile defence, this is a NATO challenge. Geographically, we sit in a certain place. Yeah. There's a whole load of NATO countries. This is a NATO conversation that we have to have. How can we best contribute to the NATO integrated air and missile defence with a view to protecting ourselves? NATO Article 3, we have a responsibility for ensuring that we are able to protect the UK and have that resilience and robustness. So that's more prevalent in our thinking. Yeah. Didn't need Aquateria, it didn't need the Middle East. We were doing that anyway. Yeah. And we've just run a 2-week exercise called Agile Warrior, which has done exactly this. It's been, there we go. So it's been testing pretty much every force element that we have in the Royal Air Force to be able to go somewhere they weren't used to operating, to go and do an operational mission simulated around the UK. And we know we're going to learn lessons. That's why we exercise. And we're building really to Steadfast Defender next year, which will be a big NATO exercise, where again, we are prepared to recognise that, yes, we're going to contribute. We want the exercise to go well. But patting your back because everything's gone well is one thing. Learning the lessons of where you're not as good. And that's I think, the real skill of the Air Force through my career has been the fact that we're able to openly and honestly debrief with a motivation to improve. Yeah. That's what Agile Warrior and that's what Steadfast Defender will do. But it's all focused on our ability to defend the UK within that NATO context. Yeah. Huge challenge. Integrated air and missile defence and control of the air are at the heart of that.
So that's a look at some of the capabilities that are literally in service as we speak, albeit Storm Shroud is a relatively new capability. I know, Sean, that you spent some time on the Tempest stand, or GCAP as others know it. Looking now as to what the future holds, and a future that's not that far away in theory. We're talking, 5-10 years. Why do we need a new aircraft, a new combat aircraft that is bigger, flies further, carries more, can penetrate even more complex air defense systems? So I'm fascinated to hear the interview that you had and see what you learned about Tempest.
The fundamental of that is twofold. One's around freedom of action, freedom of location. So our ability as a UK nation to effectively take that product and develop it as we see fit in the future to meet any future changing threat environments. We know and we've seen through the last 3 or 4 years how quickly the pace of that change is happening and the threat environment is changing. So our ability to effectively understand that threat scenario, respond to that through the technology and evaluate those through operation analysis and bring those as warfight capabilities fundamental. The other side of that is developing that pride within our nation of reinvigorating, re-establishing the combat air capability within the UK. Over the last 30, 40 years, we have eroded that capability collectively, both within industry and within the military side. And this program is all about re-establishing that and giving us that core capability of nation to operate anywhere in the world at any point we want to, at a point of our choosing.
One of the things we have here is a mock-up of Tempest. This is the next generation of fighter airplanes. If you look at the central role of control of the air, this is the tip of the sword. This is exactly what we do to fight, to deter our nation's enemies. One of the big challenges of the future, though, is how stealthy do we need this to be? Do we need to buy national, or do we need to buy from the marketplace? Either one of those. What this offers, though, is the ability to take a lot of information flowing into the cockpit, try and make sense of it quickly, trying to make the role of the pilot really simple. And that's the big challenge. A lot of people are focusing on 5th generation, 6th generation about stealth. 6th generation, it's all about integrating information and getting it, synthesizing it so the pilot can make timely decisions. It's a really exciting program. The challenge, of course, is how do we keep this platform updated? How do we stop it being very expensive? And how do we make sure we get the best bang for buck in the hands of our warfighter? This is a really impressive opportunity.
So, Greg, I genuinely felt it was a huge privilege to be invited along to the event at Brize Norton. We should say that whilst the interviews reflect the military view, all of our comments, we're not reflecting the military view. We are, on behalf of the Aerospace Power Association, an independent voice. So we, in effect, can provide a slightly more discriminatory, a more forensic look at some of this stuff. But I think it was telling on the day that I was hugely proud of the people, but it was incredible how much stuff we were expecting to be there on the day that wasn't, because it's out the door on operations.
Yeah, it's one of those things, isn't it? I think we all know that the military right now is struggling in all sorts of ways, but there's stories abound of shortages here and there. We've seen it in the papers. We've seen a lot of fuss being made. We didn't hear any of that. Not that we were expecting to. You know, they were on their best behaviour. And actually, sometimes they can be their own worst enemy, can't they? That it sounds so impressive. You walk away from the whole day uplifted, feeling really quite proud of what we've got, the men and women that are operating these things. And yet what you need to do is just step back from that very, very impressive outwards presentation and realize how paper thin it is in some places. And I think sometimes the military, you know, that can-do attitude in the military, hugely impressive individuals, it can almost be its own worst enemy. So yeah, it's very important, I think, that we do maintain that focus that you and I can do separately on just where the pinch points are and where these problems start to occur and why that might be a problem going forward.
Yeah, I mean, because I do think, you know, ultimately defence does consume a lot of money each year, and you know, quite rightly, it's up for each of the military chiefs to live within their means, whether they have enough to do what needs to be done. And I think for the last 35 years, I'd reflect that we were largely doing wars of choice. So therefore, as long as we had enough money to provide the weapons and stuff, we would tell politicians if we didn't have enough to go and do the job. Now we're facing wars of national survival. And when you start looking at some of the threats out there, when you look at the vulnerability of Israel when Iran was firing, of Iran when they'd been attacked, of Ukraine, suddenly you go, okay, there is a generation now that we need to invest in our own defence. And it doesn't mean we haven't got the raw materials, we haven't got the foundations, because the armed forces are absolutely outstanding. But I did a bit of a maths exercise, and if you look at what we were spending in the Cold War and what we have been spending since, the shortfall, if we had been continuing to spend at the same level, is about £1.4 trillion. 1.4 trillion. That is not going to be addressed by a defence investment plan. That is not going to be addressed in 1 to 10 years. It will take a long time to address, and we need to get on with that. And I do think what's very evident, you know, the Royal Air Force is now the first responders. They are doing an amazing job, as witnessed with the campaign, you know, for air power over Iran, the vulnerabilities, and it has exposed where we are short. Is how on earth do we recapitalise? How do we get the numbers there so we can back up the professionalism of our people with the equipment they need to do the job? It's pretty evident we're stretched very thin at the moment.
Yeah, you're right. It's building back that foundation that has been eroding during the time that we were serving, and when we all knew it. And slowly but surely, we've seen the situation get to where it is today. You're right. We are seeing it literally happen in front of our face. We've got the Air Force pretty stretched right now. They're borrowing assets from elsewhere, the Falkland Islands. We've got, you know, global NATO air policing in Romania. At the same time, we're running these operations in Cyprus. So, you know, it is a lot of stuff going on at the same time. And if you'd have gone to one of these visits on previous years, you'd have seen all the platforms represented. We didn't see a lot of them this time because they were busy. They were on operations doing stuff. And with things like the E7, although we spoke to some of the crews, you know, there's still no platform. We're still waiting for that, hopefully imminent. But yeah, it is stretched very, very thin. And it's one of those examples that when you're in peacetime, you can kind of muddle through that. You can cope with the day-to-day tasks. When the unexpected turns up, things like Ukraine, which clearly has been going on a long time now, and also things in Iran and the Middle East, you get stretched very, very quickly.
It's also, I mean, the weapon stockpiles. It was fascinating chatting to Buzz about some of the weapons that are used on the front line. But, you and I, when we were serving, the assumptions that were made, the risk that was taken, the size of the stockpiles was always based on a sort of 30-day war. Well, it's pretty clear that that is a flawed assumption these days. And if you haven't got a defense industrial base behind you to be continually generating, Russia is on a war footing. It's a whole of society approach. And it feels like these days you can't just outsource your military task to the military. You've got to actually, there's going to be some investment required. That is going to require some compromises. It is going to require a shift in the way that our defence industrial base operates, and frankly, a whole of society enterprise to understand that if we don't look after the number one priority, which is defence of our nation, we're not going to have enough freedoms to be able to fund a welfare state or healthcare. That Ukraine doesn't have that luxury at the moment. So it feels like we've got a bit of warning time, but not much, and a huge gulf to fill.
And I think the most important thing to remember here is too many people focus on how we would fight a war, and clearly, you can start doing maths against that assumption. This isn't about fighting a war; it's about deterring one. And you do that by being strong, peace through strength. I know that's a bit of an unused or overly used term these days, but there's some truth to that. If the other side doesn't think they can gain any advantage, then they won't try and take it. Deterrence is about projecting a strong position so that you never have to fight that war and go through that attrition.
No, you're absolutely right. Literally a couple of days ago, I was targeted online by somebody saying, "Yeah, you military, you're always looking for war." I said, actually, most military are pacifists at heart, because they've seen, you're my generation, have seen in Afghanistan particularly the brutal impacts of war. But the better prepared you are, the more likely it is you're going to avert war. So the less well prepared, the more likely it's going to happen. And the danger is that the way we are at the moment, the only way you'd be able to respond is to mass armies, conscription, and get involved in this highly attritional warfare that's happened in Ukraine. That cannot be the right answer. So I think it was a huge privilege. As wrapping this up, I was genuinely felt very proud of our military. But I also got this sense, more because there was no Typhoon there was no Joint Strike Fighter there, which had always been planned to be there, but they're just so busy. Everything is out the door working, which I suppose in one way is a positive thing. But my goodness, it feels like that sort of day on the Battle of Britain, in that fateful day when everything was out the war. If we've got any reserves, no, they're all out the door. That shouldn't be the way we plan to operate, and that's where we are today.
Yeah, my abiding memory from it was air and space power is in good hands. We just need to give them the tools to do the job.